It is very hard. People do not fully appreciate how powerful the establishment is, whether it is the healthcare industry, whether it's the military industrial complex, whether it's the fossil fuel industry. These people have unlimited amounts of money. They are very smart lobbyists in Washington, D.C., and they are very, very greedy people. They want it all.
I have to ask you about capitalism, the pros and cons. How do you see the tension, the pros of capitalism and the cons of capitalism?
In this video, Bernie Sanders educates Lex Fridman with brutal truth bombs on his own show. So Bernie wastes no time laying just how deep the establishment's grip runs, from the healthcare giants to the fossil fuel barons, pointing out how that these aren't just well-funded players, they're ruthless power brokers who will squeeze every drop of profit that they can. Lex jumps in to pivot the conversation towards capitalism itself, asking Bernie to weigh its pros and cons. And that's where Bernie really digs in here, showing why the free market isn't so free when the game is rigged by billionaires and corporate lobbyists. So make sure to watch to the end to see how Bernie Sanders educates Lex Fridman with some brutal truth bombs on his own show.
You know, some of my European friends, they say, Bernie, in the United States, you're considered to be very radical. If you were here in, France or Denmark or someplace, you'd be kind of mainstream left guy.
Yeah.
Not all that radical. So this is what I think. I think the best that we could do right now, where we are right now, is to create a society which does two things. It encourages innovation, but at the same time, it makes sure that all people in a wealthy nation have a decent standard of living. In some countries, if you look at Scandinavia, and this shocks people because we don't talk about this at all. So in Scandinavia, it has been the case, Denmark, Finland, Norway, for years, that people have healthcare. That's not a big deal. You end up in the hospital, so what? They don't pay a bill. You have, and this shocks people, in America right now, we have people who get 1 week, 2 weeks off paid vacation. Sometimes people get nothing. You know that? There are people out there who have no vacation at all. In Germany, you get 6 weeks paid vacation and other holidays as well. People are shocked by that. In America, we don't have paid family and medical leave. The only major country not to do it. Other countries, your wife gets sick, you stay home with her. Your kids get sick, not a big deal. You get a certain amount of paid family and medical leave. Cost of prescription drugs are far more affordable. So what you want to do is create what's called a social safety net. That means I don't care what your income is. Of course, you're going to have healthcare as a human right. Of course, you're going to have housing that is affordable. Of course, your kids are going to have great quality education from childcare to university without much cost. Every country has a little bit different. But there are countries in the world right now, I think in Germany, I think college is now tuition free, as I recall. For obvious reasons. They want to have the best educated workforce they can. So in terms of government playing a role in a civilized democratic society of providing all basic needs, healthcare, education, housing, retirement benefits, yes, that is what we've got to do.
So Bernie's answer here is honestly one of those moments where you can really feel the air shift. He's not just making a moral case, he's laying out cold, global comparisons that sting. By pointing out that in most of Europe he'd be considered mainstream left, he's instantly dismantling the radical label that the US media loves to pin on him. Then he walks through it. Healthcare is a right, 6 weeks of paid vacations in places like Germany, affordable prescriptions, and tuition-free colleges in countries that want an educated workforce. None of this is fantasy. It's just all standard practice in modern, wealthy democracies. What really makes this hit is how he frames the social safety net. He's not out here saying the government should run every business. He's saying you can still have innovation, entrepreneurship, and success while guaranteeing that everyone has healthcare, housing, education, and a decent quality of life. And Lex, to his credit, doesn't interrupt or try to make a pivot away here. And honestly, that silence really works in Bernie's favor. It lets the weight of the comparison just sink in. When you hear just how far behind the US is on worker benefits compared to its peers, it's hard to come up with a good counter-argument without looking like you're defending inequality.
Now, does that mean then that the government is going to run every mom and pop store on the corner? Of course not. You want innovation. You want to go out and start a business, produce a product. Good luck to you. Make money. But on the other hand, in terms of even making money, We want you to be able to do that, come up with good products, good services. But do I think you should end up with $100 billion? No, I don't. And you know what's funny? I did an interview with Bill Gates, who is, I think, the third wealthiest guy in the country, struggling behind Musk and Bezos, I think. And he's only worth 100 plus billion, but he gets by. And I said to him, Bill, he was supposed to ask me questions. I asked him the question. I said, Bill, tell me something. You know, you're an innovator with Microsoft and all that stuff. Did you know that you'd become a multi-billionaire? And was that motivated you? That one motivated you? And he said, no. And I believe he was honest. I love doing I love programming. And I was a kid. He started doing that. He loved it. He was motivated by it. Do you think that there are scientists out there who work in day and night trying to develop drugs to deal with Alzheimer's or cancer, that they're motivated? Oh boy, if I come up with this drug, I'm going to become a billionaire. So I think, we want to reward success. Fine. But you don't need $1 billion. We want people to get satisfaction from what they accomplish, the work they're doing, whether it's cleaning the street or developing a new, drug. So I think we have gone a little bit too far. And you're right in talking about the book was an attack on, you call it hypercapitalism or uber capitalism. But right now, and this is not an American issue, this is a global issue. It's not an accident that Musk is over there in Saudi Arabia talking to the, trillionaire families in the Mideast. These guys are with Putin and his friends. You got probably not more than, 5,000, 10,000 extraordinarily wealthy families who have unbelievable economic power, over 7 billion people on this planet.
Well, Elon Musk is actually an interesting case because he's investing all the money back into the businesses. So I think there is a balance to be struck, and you just spoke to it, which is we can still celebrate even big companies that are bringing wealth to the world, that are building cool stuff, that are improving quality of life, but we can question of why is it that the working class does not have a living wage in many cases, and sort of trying to find that balance.
That's right. That is the story. Look, I am no great fan of Elon Musk, especially in the role that he's playing right now in Trump's campaign. But is he a brilliant guy? Of course he is. Does he work like a dog? Of course he does. Does he come up with these incredible innovations in companies? Yes, he does. Does he deserve credit for that? Yeah, he does. But, even in terms of encouraging innovation, I would hope that we are focusing on the important issues. I would love to see great innovators figure out how we build the affordable housing that we need, come up with the great drugs that we need to solve many of the terrible illnesses that plague people. Climate change, for God's sakes. All right. Do we need innovation? We're making some progress in this country. Should we do more? What kind of technologies out there can really cut back on carbon emissions? So, I hope we focus on some of the most important issues that impact humanity. But, reward innovators, I don't have a problem with that. But I do have a problem when 3 people end up owning more wealth than the bottom half of American society.
So Bernie lays this out with nuance. Backing innovation doesn't mean letting billionaires hoard obscene amounts of wealth. The Bill Gates story drives it home. Gates was motivated by passion, not the idea of becoming a billionaire. Bernie's point is clear. Whether you're coding, cleansing streets, or curing cancer, the worth of your work shouldn't be tied to how much you can personally pocket. When Lex mentions Elon Musk, Bernie actually praises his brilliance and work ethic, which makes his critique sharper. He wants that innovation aimed at real issues: housing, healthcare breakthroughs, climate change, not just more ways for the rich to get richer. And he closes this by framing it as a global problem. A tiny elite controlling more wealth than billions of people combined. Even Lex seems to acknowledge the imbalance here.
Maybe you can briefly speak to something you tweeted recently about Donald Trump going to McDonald's and the minimum wage, I believe, of $7.50. Can you just speak to that tweet?
Look, nothing new. Trump didn't invent it. It's called a photo opportunity. I've done 1 or 2 in my life, too. So you go to a place, he puts on an apron. Good old Donald Trump, just another McDonald's worker. Yeah. But anyhow, he was civil. He did his photo op. That's fine. Kamala Harris was in North Carolina handing out food to people who were victims of the hurricane. Fine. That's what politicians do. But some reporter asked them, they said, Mr. Trump, are you for raising the minimum wage? And that was a fair question because you got, I don't know how many, but many, many thousands of McDonald's workers and millions of other American workers right now are trying to get by on $9, $10, $11 an hour. Federal minimum wage is $7.25. You have people working in McDonald's right now for sure who are working for 12, 13 bucks an hour. So the reporter said, what do you think about raising the federal minimum wage? And he's, oh, these are great workers. I love McDonald's, and so forth. He didn't answer the question. Well, I think that in the richest country in the history of the world, if you work 40 hours a week, you should not be living in poverty. And that means we should have a federal minimum wage, not absurdly $7.25 an hour, but in my view, $17 an hour. Will that solve all the economic problems for working class people? No, it won't. It'll help. It'll help.
Since running for president, you've often been attacked, especially from the right, about being worth, I believe, $2 million and owning 3 houses. So from my perspective, the answer to that is most of your wealth has been earned from writing books and selling those books. And you are one of the most famous politicians in the world. And so your wealth in the context in comparison to other people of that fame level and other politicians is actually quite modest. So what's your response usually to those attacks?
Do I own 3 residences? Yeah, I do. I live here in Burlington, Vermont. We live in a middle-class neighborhood, nice house. Guess what? I'm a United States Senator, and I own a home in Washington, D.C., as do most senators. You live there year after year. When I first when I was in Congress for 16 years, I rented all the time. But I got elected. Okay, got a 6-year term. You know what? Let's buy a house. So we bought a house. And guess what? Like many thousands of people in the state of Vermont, I have a summer camp. It's a nice one on Lake Champlain. That's it. Now, how did I get the money? You're right. I wrote 2 best-selling books, including this book on capitalism. It was New York Times bestseller for a while. And also another book was a youth book. And I make, I don't know, $175,000 a year. And that's more or less how I became the zillionaire that I am.
So, wrapping this up, Bernie calls out Trump's McDonald's visit as a stage photo op that dodged the real issue, raising the federal minimum wage. He makes it clear that in the richest country in history, full-time work shouldn't mean poverty, and $17 an hour is a fair baseline. When Lex brings up the 3 houses attack, Bernie answers openly, explaining his wealth came from book sales and his Senate salary, with nothing comparable to the billionaires he critiques. It just shows how personal digs are often just distractions from real debates, and that's where the bias shows. And speaking of bias, are you getting tired of getting news from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite? How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, whether it's left, right, or center, are covering the same story, so you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get a 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights in media bias and political trends. So stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.